It is the 9 o'clock hour. Good morning, everyone. I'm not in my usual seat, but I'll take whatever is available. I hope you'll take yours as well. Good morning and welcome to the worship here at First Presbyterian Church on this beautiful Sunday, well, warm and humid Sunday morning. We're delighted to have you with us this morning. Let's get underway with the singing of number 43. Number 43, this is Amazing Grace. Number 2. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first seated. I don't play and sing at the same time very well, but I'll do my very best. We have all of our pianists away this weekend. And again, it's a blessing to have all of you here today. Our hymns are, we could have done it a cappella, but I just think the hymns sound better with a little accompaniment. Today, we welcome back Samuel Moss, who is no stranger to our class. He was here earlier, was here last summer, and was here around the end of the year last year over in the garden. Sam, we're delighted to have you with us this morning. Thank you for being a part of our program. We look forward to hearing your talk on the creation this morning. I have one announcement that two people have reminded me of that I had an email about earlier this week. Our friend Nancy Fogarty is giving a recital this afternoon out at Wellspring, along with Tim Hudson, who is a Yamaha performing artist and a professor of trumpet at Gardner-Webb. That's at 3 o'clock this afternoon at Wellspring, and that is absolutely free. Just come to the main gate and tell them that you're there for the recital. Our prayer hymn this morning, in an abbreviated form today, is hymn number 12. This is Sweet Hour of Prayer. Somehow we haven't sung that one this year, and that seems like one we sing multiple times in the course of the year. This is a hymn, they're always different types of prayer. There's corporate prayer that we do congregationally. This is more about personal prayer, the one where we slink into our closet and have our private moments of meditation. Beautiful hymn about personal prayer, Sweet Hour of Prayer, hymn number 12.
And
Verse number 2. Thank you for your abbreviated singing this morning. I hope you have a beautiful and blessed Sunday. Jim.
Thank you, Lane and Lane. Welcome, Agape Class and Young Men's Bible Study on Sunday, August 9th, 2026. Andy Hines has our opening prayer.
Dear God, we live in times of great division and mistrust. Things we grew up with and had great faith in are now being called into question. There's no mistrust. There is mistrust in our government, of our scientists, of people in authority, and our whole way of life in America. It is in you, God, that we place our unconditional trust and our unwavering faith to guide us in both the good times and in the times of dissension. We pray that you will be with our church, our community, our country, and with those who protect us. We ask that you would especially be with our youth and all who have influence on them. May they know that we are truly blessed to live in the greatest country in this world. Dear God, as we go through our daily lives this week, we ask for your continued guidance and blessings. In Jesus Christ's name we pray.
Thank you, Andy. Do we have any guests today? Do we have any announcements? Okay. It's good humor time. Why did the golfer bring an extra pair of pants? In case he got a hole in one. Why do cows wear bells? Because their horns don't work. Why did the invisible man turn down the job? He couldn't see himself doing it. We have the pleasure of Samuel Moss being here to prepare us for engaging lecture, who will present us on the topic of chaos to cosmos. Sam?
Thank you, Bill. While I make sure everything is working, my lovely assistant, Fred Horner's daughter, Kristen, has a little half-page handout When you first look at it, you're going to go, oh my Lord, what are we in for today? It's Greek to me, and in parentheses, or maybe it's Hebrew. It's just 3 words. Do not be intimidated by them, but they will come in handy later on. Let me just see if we are working here. Here we go. In my inaugural visit with you 2 or 3 months ago, I mentioned that oftentimes a good lecture is prepared the same way a good meal is prepared. You've got an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. So for our appetizer this morning, we're going to look at the question, who wrote the Bible? And specifically, we're going to look at a concept called documentary hypothesis. If that sounds boring to you, it's only because it is. But it's also a necessary foundation to understanding the biblical text of Genesis 1 and 2. That foundation, it's kind of like the cinder blocks on your house. Nobody wants to look at them. But without the cinder blocks, your house is going to fall. So it's, I promise you, the appetizer will not last longer than 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Then we will go to our entree, Chaos to Cosmos, Part 1, and 2 weeks from now, on August 23rd, we'll do Part 2. For dessert, I'm going to look at an innocuous little 1/2 verse that scholars refer to as they roll their eyes as Genesis 2.4a. Genesis 2.4a is just a few words. It's a 1/2 of a single verse that has vexed scholars across the board for decades now. And so right here this morning in this place, I'm going to fix that once and for all and be done with it. And like Aaron Burr in the Broadway hit Hamilton, you are going to be able to tell your friends, I was in the room where it happened. So are you ready? Yeah. All right. Who wrote the Bible? There are many different avenues by which to explore the question, who wrote the Bible? But the most long-standing and historically solid answer to that question is referred to as documentary hypothesis. The documentary hypothesis is based on a prevailing theory that 4 basic schools of thought are embedded in the Jewish Pentateuch. The Pentateuch being the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah. Those 4 schools of thought are each identified by a simple letter in the English alphabet, J, E, D, or P. The single most easily recognizable distinction between those various schools is the unique understanding of God that each school developed out of their vast oral tradition. In a nutshell, that prime distinction among the 4 schools of biblical writing looks something like this. The J school is referred to as the Yahwist because of its preference for referring to God by the very personal name Yahweh, or Yahweh in English translation. The name Yahweh is transliterated into English Bibles as the word Lord when it's in all capital letters. It is the Yahwist who regularly uses the bold anthropomorphism with which the average garden variety Christian often describes the characteristics and activities of God. Think towering male figure with human features such as the long white beard and even all too human emotions. The E school is known as the Elohist because of its preference for the generic, not the personal, but the generic name for the deity, Elohim, translated into English as the common title, God. Interestingly, the Hebrew Elohim is actually a plural noun and is correctly translated as the divine beings with an S at the end. And then there is the Deuteronomist. The D School wrote the entire book of Deuteronomy and, for better or worse, significantly permeates vast portions of the Hebrew Bible with the sweeping brushstrokes of a singular and simplistic framework. And that framework runs like this. Everything in life happens for a reason, a divine reason. Good things happen to good people. Only good things happen to good people. Bad things happen, but only to bad people. Therefore, if you are unhappy with what is happening in your life, you have no one to blame but yourself. It is just that simple. You need to get right with God. I compared the writings of the Deuteronomists against the more enlightened theodicy of Harold S. Kushner. In the early 1980s, Rabbi Kushner brought to our attention the glaring deficiencies of Deuteronomistic thinking. The fact of the matter is this, he says, life is not fair. It never was. God does not dole out good and evil, blessings and curses, based on individual merit. Stuff happens, oftentimes to good people. And listening to the D School blame the victim does not make things any better, or fair, or compassionate. Diving further into the D School would require a whole nother lecture. And finally, the priestly writings, as the name suggests, represent the caste and the milieu of the Israelite priesthood. The book of Leviticus is a good example of the priestly concerns and their modus operandi. It also is a guaranteed cure for insomnia. We'll say a bit more about the priestly tradition in just a moment. Now, the writings of the J and P schools will dominate our thinking about the Bible in the course of these two lectures. And there's no better illustration of the stark differences between them than the creation narratives with which the Bible opens and to which we now turn, beginning with the priestly version. In the beginning, the first words of the Hebrew Bible actually begin a circumstantial clause in what becomes a long and complicated sentence spread over 3 entire biblical verses. It describes the state of matter in the universe as a chaotic mix of earth, wind, water, and darkness. It is important to note that the idea of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, is not supported by the Hebrew text. Within the primordial darkness, a watery chaos already exists before the first word of Genesis is spoken. Rather, it is the separation among the elements of the chaos that is the prerequisite for creation. This concern for separation typifies the worldview of the priestly authors, where every created item belongs to a clearly delineated category apart from others. Thus, in order to separate the cosmos from the chaos, God utters what in the Hebrew tradition is a single word: light! And there was light. This supernal light is not the visible light that we receive from the sun or the stars, none of which have been created at this point. No, this is the creative light from God's own Word. The light that pushes the watery forces of chaos, the biblical tahu wabahu, one of my favorite phrases, to the outer edges of the universe, inaugurating the first act in a 6-day drama of divine cosmic separation, ordering, and creativity. Here's where we see the concerns of the priestly tradition, the P school, come full circle. For the priestly school of thought arose in response to the catastrophe of the Babylonian exile and was designed to document and codify the liturgical and ritual prerogatives of the Israelite priesthood before all that knowledge and lore was forgotten as the Israelites languished in a foreign land. The idea of separation is critical to the priestly understanding of nationhood as well as identity for the people of Israel. Thus, Judaism is distinguished throughout the biblical writings by a host of separations in diet, eating kosher, clothing, the way they dress, in planting, harvesting, marriage, worship, and the list goes on. It should not surprise us, therefore, that the priestly tradition represents God as also separating creation from chaos as a first order of business and a recurring theme, as we shall see. The narrative story of Genesis 1, written by the priestly school of theology, can be illustrated best as a cosmic pyramid of divine construction, with each step in the pyramid representing one of those first 6 days of creation. Now, please note, if you ever forget which of our 4 schools wrote the creation story of Genesis 1, just remember, P for pyramid, P for priests, easy peasy. Thus we have, following upon God's divine word of light, day 1, which involves the separation of light from darkness, day from night. Now, before we continue with the remaining days of creation, I have a pop quiz for you. This question may seem trivial, but it becomes very important when we have dessert at the end of our lecture. And our pop quiz question is this: on which day of the week did God begin the creation? When I teach online, I have the Jeopardy theme song now. I won't bore you with that. Anybody want to take a guess? What's the first day? Sunday. Very good. That bonus point. Correct answer is Sunday. Now, it is important to note that nowhere in Genesis 1 are the days of the week mentioned by name. Nonetheless, the specific description of the 7th day of creation, as well as the entire literary and liturgical structure of the Hebrew Bible, really leaves no room for doubt that the first day of creation was a Sunday, with the 7th day becoming a Saturday Sabbath, with more on that in just a bit. So on day 2, we have the building of the firmament, the sky, and, once again, the separation of the waters that are below the earth from the waters that are above the earth. On day 3, we have the separation of the land from the waters, the beginning of vegetation. On day 4, we have the creation of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, to this point, God has created simply by uttering the divine creative word, "Let there be," followed by whatever it is that God desires to bring into being. On day 5, God initiates a more hands-on approach to creation. God begins making things, making living creatures, not simply speaking them into existence. which reminds me of one of my favorite Far Side cartoons, where God creates the snake. We are now where God is making things. For the snake, God does not just go, let there be snakes, and the snakes appear. No, God has a box of clay, and God is putting the clay just like we did as kids, and his comment is, boy, these things are a cinch. On day 5, God makes sea creatures, followed by the birds of the air. On day 6, God makes land animals, culminating in the creation of, the Hebrew word is Adam, Homo sapiens sapiens, us. Let us look more closely at this critical day 6. By the way, I just had a thought. You notice that the creation of us occurs on a Friday. Maybe that explains why we all love Fridays so much. Okay, so the creation story in Genesis 1 reaches a crescendo beginning in verse 26, which reads, "And God said, let us make Adam in our image." Now please note, the Hebrew word Adam does not mean man generically, or a man particularly, or even a male human gender specific. This is abundantly clear in the very next verse, verse 27. Male and female, God created Adam. And by the way, the Hebrew word Adam is not used as the proper name of an actual man until chapter 5, way down the road from where we are. The nearest English equivalent to the Hebrew Adam is the simple concept of a generic human being. It is derived from the Hebrew word Adamah, which means earth, as in dirt or soil. Therefore, this Adam is simply the earth human, the earth being of either male or female gender. Enough said. On the 7th day, God put the finishing touches on the cosmos and then rested from all labor, thus creating the Sabbath as the pinnacle of creation. Now there is a glaring textual problem with this 7th day of creation, to which we shall return when we have dessert at the conclusion of this lecture. For now, the priestly pyramid is a perfect illustration of God's design and architecture, beginning with the creation of light on day 1 and culminating with the Sabbath Saturday as the pinnacle of God's creative activity on the 7th day. The structure of this pyramid impressively develops a grand theology of creation that encompasses the entire cosmos. But it is somewhat disappointing that the priestly narrative provides no details on exactly how God goes about creating Adam. God simply says to the divine council, let us make Adam. And then God makes Adam, both male and female virgins, and then the story simply moves on. While the priestly account of God's creation of human beings is intentionally reticent, the narrative of Genesis 2, which we will explore in 2 weeks, provides fascinating details, as well as 3 linguistic clues to help fill in the gaps, so to speak, of exactly how we come to be created in Genesis 1. You can find those 3 clues on the little handout that you may have taken. I want to introduce you to those 3 Hebrew concepts and then give you an example of how they all work together in the biblical understanding of creation. The first big Hebrew word is neshama. Neshama connotes potentiality, especially in the realm of ideas. Neshama points toward the future, toward what is not yet, but might yet be. Ruach is physical movement or kinetic energy. It involves action and or creative activity. The Hebrew ruach is equivalent to the Greek pneuma and is rightly translated in the New Testament as breath, wind, spirit, all of the above. Nefesh is the result of an idea being activated and put into motion by the ruach and achieving actuality. In English translation, neshama often is rendered as soul, which absolutely, I'm afraid, is incorrect. There is no such thing as the soul in either early Judaism or the Hebrew Bible. The idea of soul is a Greek concept and does not appear in biblical texts until the emergence of the Christian writings of the New Testament. In order to explore these three biblical Hebrew words in more detail and to provide you with the general flavor of these paradigm-shifting concepts, I am enlisting the help of my old friend Michelangelo and his Sistine Chapel fresco entitled The Creation of Adam. In exquisite detail, we see on the left Adam, the earth being, freshly formed from the Adamah. He appears somewhat languid, even bordering on lethargic. He has the form of a human being, but not the essence, because, please notice, God's right forefinger has not yet touched the outstretched hand or finger of the Adam. The form of the man has yet to be animated. Something is missing. And that something is found over on the right side panel. The child resting under God's left hand. If we zoom in on that, please notice the similarities between the child and the freshly formed man in their expression, their pose, their inclination. In Michelangelo's viewing, the child represents the idea that God has for creating an Adam, embodying both God's design and God's desire in making this particular creature. The child is the essence of the Adam before the Adam has become a living being. And as we just learned in our word study, that essence, that potentiality is called neshama. In the right panel, this divine potentiality has not yet been imparted to the human form in the left panel. The divine potentiality of the neshama, the child, must be animated by God's ruach, God's breath, God's creative power through breath and wind. This is what Michelangelo is representing in the arms of God and Adam, almost, but not quite yet, touching. It is through the vehicle of the ruach, it is through the vehicle of God's breath that the neshama fills the body of Adam. And Adam then, and only then, becomes a nefesh, an actuality, a living being made in the very image of the divine craftsman's design and desire. And it needs to be emphasized that this whole process is to be repeated for the female version of Adam as well. The neshama for the first female is represented in the figure whom God is embracing with his left arm. Her neshama also will be infused into a yet-to-be actualized body by the divine Ruach, and she too will become a nephesh, a living being. And God created Adam, male and female. God created them both. Please note that in the interest of full transparency, none of these three specialized Hebrew words is actually present in the creation narrative of Genesis 1, nor is Michelangelo's fresco a completely accurate representation of either Genesis 1 or Genesis 2 alone, but is rather an amalgam of the two traditions. But, important but, these specialized words are present in the creation narrative of Genesis 2, which we will explore again in 2 weeks. And just like the days of the week in the creation pyramid, these words, neshama, ruach, nefesh, are at the very heart of the Hebrew understanding of how we came to be. Hopefully you now have a better understanding of the dynamics of biblical creation than we could have accomplished otherwise. Who has room for dessert? Always. Thank you. After my own heart. We have one task remaining to finalize the first narrative of biblical creation in Genesis 1. But when we reach the conclusion of chapter 1, God has completed only 6 days of creation, not 7. Thus, our pyramid of creative order has been truncated and flattened at the top instead of reaching its apex in a bright singular point. Why is that? Again, Genesis chapter 1 ends after the 6th day of creation. The 7th day of creation and the conclusion of our narrative has been moved to chapter 2. How did that happen? The answer to that question is disappointing, for it reflects a Christian polemic in biblical interpretation. Polemic is a fancy word for sticking your thumb in your opponent's eye. Originally, the Hebrew Bible did not have chapter divisions. It was written as a continuous text on long rolling scrolls, with breaks appearing in the text only in places where the narrative scenes or topics under discussion changed. Chapter divisions and verse numbers, often written in red, were not inserted into Jewish biblical texts until the Middle Ages, 700 to 1500 years after those texts were written. And those chapter-verse divisions from the Middle Ages were invented by Christian editors as a way of dividing the Hebrew text for easy reference by Christian exegetes. Jewish scholars never have accepted this chapter-verse division, but they began to adopt this chapter-verse strategy in the 13th century, but only so that they could understand what the heck Christians were referring to when the Christian exegetes made citations regarding their own Hebrew scriptures. Chapter 1 of the book of Genesis ends with verse 31, which refers to the end of the 6th day of creation. And God saw all that he had made and found it very good. And there was evening, there was morning, the sixth day. End of chapter 1. The chapter break following this verse, and prematurely beginning chapter 2, unnaturally severs the narrative about the seventh day of creation, now moved to Genesis 2, away from the story of the first 6 days of creation in Genesis 1. Why did the Christian chapter division lop off the end of the story, including the Sabbath day of rest, and its sanctification as holy time? This misdivision was instituted by Christians in order to highlight their celebration of the Lord's Day, sometimes called the Christian Sabbath, on Sunday, the first day of the week. This polemic also served two other purposes. One, it severs the Jewish Sabbath on Saturday from the creation narrative proper. And two, it pushes the Jewish Sabbath into the Christian version of the Garden of Eden story. And therefore, the Christian story of the fall found in Genesis 2 and 3. One other consequence of this medieval misdivision has been confusion as to where the seven-day creation story officially ends and the garden story officially begins. Excuse me. And the debate always centers on, on that unremarkable one-half verse known as Genesis 2.4a, not to be confused with Genesis 2.4b, which comes immediately after. This half verse is a pebble in the shoe for a whole host of biblical scholars. Half of them argue that Genesis 2.4a is the summarizing statement that officially concludes the preceding creation account. The other half argues that Genesis 2.4a is the official beginning of the garden story that follows. Newsflash for scholars around the globe. You're all wrong. As any Jewish exegete would immediately recognize, Genesis 2.4a is written specifically as a formula that is repeated 10 other times in the book of Genesis. That formula always runs as follows. These are the generations of X, and then fill in the blank. And in each of those 10 repetitions of the formula, that one-half verse always serves the same purpose. It is a bridge between two completely independent narratives. That bridge simultaneously points backward to the story that has just been completed, while simultaneously pointing forward to the story that is about to unfold. It is as if the author is saying, remember that story about X? We'll get a load of the story that comes next. And now, my fellow Christians, you know more about Genesis 2.4a than most Christian scholars of the 21st century. Congratulations. Let us celebrate this occasion by dissolving the biblical polemic of previous centuries and concluding the first narrative of creation as it was originally written, as a single unit. And let us place the Sabbath at the pinnacle of this creation story as the culmination of God's divine pleasure, whatever day of the week it is celebrated. May it be so. And so we have explored the priestly narrative of the creation and our place within it. But there is another creation story, this one written by the J school of thought, and found in the second chapter of the book of Genesis. It is a very different narrative of creation that we will explore in 2 weeks. Or, as verse 2.4a might say, remember that creation story in Genesis 1? Just wait till you see what happens next. I will see you on August 23rd. I will also take questions. Yes.
When were the black people and the Oriental people created?
That's very interesting, and I have to kind of step outside my topic today to answer that. Here's the interesting thing. The question is, all the other races, how do we get from a singular species into several races within that species? And here's where biblical literacy really gets, because you can always ask simple questions that kind of throw a monkey wrench in it. So, the way the Bible is written chronologically, you have the first man and the first woman, and then they have 2 children, Cain and Abel. And you all remember in Genesis 4 the horrible story of fratricide. Cain kills his brother Abel, and God banishes Cain from the garden, and he goes to live in the land of Nod, which I don't even know what that means, but he's off on his own. And yet later on, we learn that Cain has found a wife and has a family and has created a civilization, and there's all these other people that didn't come out of the garden, and so literalists struggle with this. Where did all these people come from? They didn't come from the garden. They didn't come from the original couple. And so the simple, straightforward answer is that the Bible recognizes from the very beginning, the Bible recognizes that there are people apart from the Israelites, and that they have existed somehow along with them without it ever being defined or described how that came about. In the same way, I'll use a slightly different example. The Hebrew Bible never denies the existence of other gods. What the Hebrew Bible says is, other gods may exist, but you shall have none of them before me. So the Hebrew Bible said, we understand other people are doing other things, but that's not for us. And so we concentrate on the Jewish Israelite story. And by the same token, the biblical authors recognize, there have been people in other places since time immemorial, and we don't know where they came from, but they're not our story. We're telling our story and how we came to be the people that we are, which I realize, and forgive me, it doesn't really answer your question, but it lays the groundwork for understanding the biblical frame of reference and how the Bible intends to simply narrow the focus down and not look at humanity generically, but to look at one specific people and their story and what we learn from that. I hope that helps someone. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So this is kind of a follow-up.
Yes.
Based on what you said, are you saying that the 4 authors are all enotheistic?
Are what?
Are all enotheistic? They're all that all 4 authors are in agreement with what you said about having no gods, but there are other gods that having no gods before?
I would be reluctant to say that, only because each of those 4 schools represents an amalgam of groupthink, so to speak. And so within that group, let's call ourselves we'll call ourselves the P group, the Presbyterians. But within the Presbyterians, just right here, and we're certainly not an exhaustive sample of Presbyterians, but even within our small group here, I'm willing to bet if we were to sit down and have a discussion on theology or theodicy, we would find various views. Not everyone would absolutely agree on every point of doctrine or dogma or anything else. But as Presbyterians, this group represents a particular ethos and a particular doctrine that it is held to be normative for all of us, even if we don't all follow it exactly to the letter. We all agree on the spirit of the law, so to speak, even if we don't always agree on the details. And I think, and I'm not trying to hedge your question, but I think that would be true of the JED and P schools, that they were not just a single author. We just refer to them as a single letter for convenience sake. But this actually represents an amalgam of authors who have kind of put their heads together and combined traditions from the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. And within that, I would have to believe that there is quite a bit of variation in thought, and that JEPD simply become normative for those groups, but not necessarily speaks to every single issue. Does that help at all? Okay, thank you. Anything else? You all have been wonderful. I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. I'm sorry. Next week you have a special presentation on, forgive me, I'm trying to remember the name of the committee that's kind of assessing the future, and that's a part of a number of things that are happening next week, and so that kind of takes precedent. Plus, you all need a break because you can study your Hebrew words, and I'll see you on the 23rd. Thank you so much.